The pregnant woman at the counter had their dead mother's face. Same pale blue eyes, same ash blonde hair, same straight nose. 3 identical 7-year-old girls froze, forks in midair. Their widowed dad's coffee cup tilted, spilling slowly. The stranger smiled, hand resting on her belly, and asked the baker for a lemon cake recipe, the exact recipe their late mother made every Christmas. She was a stranger, but she wore their mother's exact face, and she was 7 months pregnant. Stephen had been bringing his triplets to this bakery every Saturday since their mother died. It was their ritual, a thread to the woman who had held their family together. The girls were 7 now, identical, still in matching dresses their mom had picked out. Then the brass bell on the door chimed, and a heavily pregnant woman walked in wearing their mother's exact face. Not a resemblance, a perfect copy. She wasn't a ghost. She was a stranger asking for a lemon cake recipe, the very one Margaret baked every Christmas. The question no one could say out loud: who was this woman and what did she know about a dead mother's secret recipe? Margaret had died on a Tuesday 3 years ago, an aneurysm at 31. No warning, no goodbye. Stephen had come home from work to find the triplets sitting on the floor with a babysitter, waiting for Mommy to wake up. They were 4 then. They didn't understand why Mommy wouldn't open her eyes. That night, Stephen held all 3 girls in his arms and promised them he would never let them forget her. He promised them Saturdays at the bakery. It was the one place Margaret had loved most, a cramped little shop on Maple Street with a brass bell on the door and a baker who still wrote recipes on index cards. She had taken the girls there every weekend while Stephen worked. After she was gone, the ritual became sacred. The bakery was called Golden Rise. The baker, a man in his late 60s named Arthur, had run it for 40 years. He had watched Margaret grow up as a customer, then as a young mother. He knew her order by heart: a croissant for each girl, black coffee for her, and always a single slice of lemon cake to share. The lemon cake wasn't on the menu. It was a recipe Margaret had learned from Arthur herself, years before. She had begged him to teach her when she was a teenager coming in after school. Arthur had been a quiet mentor. He had told her once, "This recipe belonged to someone special. You remind me of her." Margaret had never known exactly what he meant. She just loved the cake. She baked it for every birthday, every holiday. After her death, Stephen tried to replicate it once. The triplets took one bite and cried. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. For 3 years, the Saturday ritual held the family together. Stephen would sit at the corner table, the one by the bay window, watching the morning light catch his daughter's identical faces. They were 7 now. Their hair was the same ash blonde shade as Margaret's. Their eyes the same pale blue. Strangers stopped and stared. Some took pictures. The girls didn't mind. They had each other. But Stephen saw the shadow that hung over them. Chloe, the youngest by 6 minutes, still slept with Margaret's sweater under her pillow. She asked questions about heaven. She wanted to know if Mommy still liked lemon cake. So when the brass bell chimed that Saturday and Stephen looked up to see a woman at the counter, his brain short-circuited. It wasn't just a resemblance. The nose, the cheekbones, the exact shade of hair, the way she tilted her head while scanning the chalkboard menu. She was heavily pregnant, one hand resting on the curve of her belly. She wore a soft green dress. She looked curious, unaware. Stephen felt his chest tight. He told himself it was grief playing tricks. Grief did that. It made you see the dead in every supermarket aisle, in every passing car. But the triplets saw it too. Charlotte dropped her fork. Emma's mouth opened slightly. Chloe froze mid-chew, a crumb falling from her lip. All 3 sets of pale blue eyes locked onto the woman as though she had stepped out of a photograph. Stephen didn't move. He couldn't. He watched the woman approach the counter and speak to Arthur in a quiet voice. She said, "I know this sounds strange, but my grandmother used to live in this town. She passed away last month. She told me there was a bakery here that made a lemon cake she loved when she was younger. She said the recipe belonged to a girl who worked here a long time ago. I was hoping maybe you still have it." Arthur, who had been wiping the pastry case, stopped. His hand hovered over the glass. He stared at the woman for a long moment. Then his eyes drifted toward the corner table where the triplets sat. He looked back at her. His voice was hoarse. "Who was your grandmother?" "Ruth Callahan," the woman said. She lived near the river. She told me to ask for the recipe from a baker named Arthur. She said he would understand. Arthur didn't answer immediately. He set down the cloth. His jaw tightened. Ruth Callahan, he repeated slowly. I remember Ruth. She used to bring a young girl here, a girl named Patricia, was it? The woman's eyes widened. That's my name, Patricia, but I never lived here. I was adopted as an infant. I never knew my birth mother. My grandmother, Ruth, she was the only family I had. She never talked about my mother, just that old recipe. Stephen's coffee cup began to tip. Caught it just in time, but the liquid splashed onto the table. His hands were shaking. He rose from his chair and walked toward the counter, his footsteps heavy on the tile floor. The triplets watched him go, their eyes huge. Chloe whispered, "That's Mommy, that's Mommy's face." Patricia turned as Stephen approached. She flinched slightly at his expression. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did I say something wrong?" Stephen's mouth opened. No words came. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He unfolded a photograph, creased and worn at the edges. It was Margaret on their wedding day, standing in a field of wildflowers, her hair loose, her smile wide. He held it out to Patricia with a trembling hand. Patricia looked at the photo. Her face went gray. She took a step back, bracing herself against the counter. The color drained from her lips. That's me," she stammered. "But I've never been here. I've never worn that dress. I don't understand." "That's my wife," Stephen said, his voice barely a whisper. "Her name was Margaret. She died 3 years ago. She was 31. She was also adopted. She was born on July 12th. Patricia's breathing hitched. "My birthday is July 12th. I'm 33. That's 3 years apart." The bakery fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the pastry case and the distant ticking of the wall clock. Arthur, behind the counter, had not moved. His eyes were wet. He looked from Stephen to Patricia and back again. This was not a coincidence. This was a reckoning, but the truth was still buried deeper, because Arthur knew exactly who their birth mother was. He had been waiting 40 years for one of her daughters to walk through that door. And now, with both of them standing in front of him, one alive, one remembered in a photograph, he was about to reveal the secret that connected them all. A secret that would turn a family recipe into something far more devastating. Arthur stepped out from behind the counter. He walked slowly, the way a man walks when he is carrying a weight he has held for decades. He pulled a stool from the corner and sat down heavily between Stephen and Patricia. The triplets had crept closer, drawn by the silence, by the strange woman who looked like their mother. Charlotte held Emma's hand. Chloe clutched the edge of the pastry case. None of them spoke. Arthur looked at Patricia, then at the photograph of Margaret still in her hand. His voice came out rough, like an old door opening. "I've been waiting for this day for 40 years, he said. "I didn't know which one of you would walk through that door first. I just knew one of you would." Patricia's lips parted. She still held her belly, instinctively shielding her unborn child from whatever truth was coming. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "I came for a recipe, my grandmother's recipe." "That lemon cake wasn't your grandmother," Arthur said. "It was your mother's, your birth mother. And that woman in the photograph, Margaret, she was your sister." The word hung in the air like the chime of the brass bell. "Sister." Patricia shook her head. "I don't have a sister. I was an only child. I was adopted as a baby. I never knew my birth mother. My grandmother Ruth raised me after my adoptive parents died. She never said anything about a sister." "Ruth knew," Arthur said. "She knew everything. She was the one who brought that young girl into this bakery 42 years ago. The girl's name was Alina. She was 15 years old, frightened and pregnant. Ruth was a social worker then. She found Alina sleeping in a bus station and brought her here for a warm meal. That was the first time I met her." Stephen's legs felt hollow. He gripped the edge of the counter. Margaret had been adopted as an infant too. They had searched for her birth parents after the triplets were born, wanting to know medical history, but the records were sealed. All they had was a birth certificate with a blank where the mother's name should have been. He had never thought to dig deeper. Grief had buried the question. Arthur continued, his eyes fixed on the middle distance. "Alina stayed in town. She worked here in this bakery from the time she was 15 until she was 18. I taught her how to bake. She was like a daughter to me. The lemon cake was her creation. She came up with it one afternoon when she was sad and needed something sweet. We wrote the recipe together on an index card. She made me promise never to lose it. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. She looked at the index card she had brought with her, the one her grandmother Ruth had left her in a sealed envelope, the one that said, "Golden Rise Lemon Cake, ask Arthur." She had thought it was just a sentimental errand. Now the card felt like a grenade. Alina gave birth to a baby girl when she was 16, Arthur said. She named her Margaret. She held her for 3 hours before the adoption agency took her away. Alina cried for a week. She baked that lemon cake every day for a month, trying to fill the emptiness. She told me once that she hoped one day her daughter would taste it and know she was loved. Chloe, the youngest triplet, tugged on Stephen's sleeve. "Daddy, is that lady talking about Mommy?" Stephen couldn't answer. His throat had closed completely. The girls had never known their mother's adoption story. They were too young to understand the complexity of it, the sorrow of a teenage girl giving up a child. Now the past was rushing into this bakery like a flood. 3 years later, Arthur went on, Alina came back. She was 19, pregnant again. The father was the same man, a boy from a neighboring town who had promised to marry her and never did. She was alone, just like before. Ruth helped her again. She gave birth to another girl. She named her Patricia. Arthur looked directly at the woman in the green dress. "That was you." Patricia's knees buckled. Stephen caught her arm and guided her to a chair. She sank into it, her breathing shallow. "My birth mother died giving birth to me," she said, the words barely audible. "Ruth told me that much. She said my mother was very young and very brave. But she never told me I had a sister. She never told me about this bakery, about any of it." Ruth promised Alina she would keep the secret, Arthur said. Alina didn't want Margaret to know she had been given up. She was ashamed. She thought Margaret would hate her, so she asked Ruth and me never to speak of it. But before she died, and she knew she was dying, the labor was complicated and she lost too much blood, she gave me this. Arthur reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a yellowed envelope. It was sealed with wax, the edges soft with age. On the front in faded handwriting were 2 names, Margaret and Patricia. "She wrote a letter to both of you," Arthur said. "She made me promise to keep it until one of you found your way back here. She said, one day they'll come looking for the recipe. When they do, give them this. Tell them I never stopped loving them." Patricia stared at the envelope. Stephen stared at it. The triplets, too young to grasp the full weight, sensed that something monumental was happening. Charlotte stepped forward. "Is that from our mommy?" she asked, her voice small and brave. Arthur looked at the child, her pale blue eyes so exactly like Alina, like Margaret's, like Patricia's. "This is from your mommy's mommy," he said gently, "your grandmother." The word grandmother unleashed something in Chloe. She burst into tears. "I want my mommy," she sobbed and ran to Stephen. He scooped her up and held her tight, his own eyes burning. Emma and Charlotte crowded around his legs. Patricia watched the scene, her hand still on her belly, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was 7 months pregnant, carrying a child who would never know its father. Her husband, Adam, had been killed 6 weeks ago in a construction accident. A beam had fallen. She had been left with a half-packed nursery and a silence in their apartment that screamed louder than any noise. She had come to this town, her grandmother's town, as a last pilgrimage before moving away to start over somewhere she had no memories. She thought the recipe was just a keepsake. She had no idea she would find a dead sister and 3 nieces who wore her face. Stephen lowered Chloe to the floor and walked over to Patricia. He knelt down so he was at eye level with her, the way he did when one of his daughters was frightened. "You didn't just lose your grandmother," he said quietly. "You lost your husband too." Patricia nodded, unable to speak. "And you're having a baby alone." She nodded again. Stephen looked at the triplets, then back at Patricia. "You're not alone," he said, "not anymore." Arthur opened the envelope. He did not read the letter aloud. That was for Patricia and in spirit for Margaret. But he told them what he knew. Alina was a good person. She made one mistake, trusting the wrong man, but she never made the mistake of not loving her daughters. She wrote you each a separate page inside that letter. She wanted you to know that the lemon cake was her love made edible. She hoped you would bake it together someday. Patricia looked at the triplets. The girls looked back at her, their faces a mirror of the woman in the photograph, of the woman sitting before them, of the grandmother they would never meet. Emma, the most analytical of the 3, spoke first. "So you're our aunt?" she asked. Patricia smiled through tears. "I think I am," she said. Charlotte stepped forward and touched Patricia's belly. "And that's our cousin." Patricia placed her hand over Charlotte's small one. "Yes, that's your cousin." Chloe, still sniffling, tugged Patricia's sleeve. "Will you teach us the lemon cake recipe? Daddy tried to make it once, but it wasn't right. Mommy's was better." Patricia looked up at Stephen, then at Arthur. She nodded. "I'll teach you. I have the recipe right here." She held up the index card from Ruth, the one that had started everything. Arthur rose from his stool and walked to the back of the bakery. He returned with a small metal box, the kind that holds recipe cards. He opened it and pulled out a stack of handwritten cards, each one in the same looping script. "These are all Eleanor's recipes," he said. "I kept them. I always hoped one of you would come for them." He handed the box to Patricia. Then he took a copy of the lemon cake recipe, one he had written out fresh that morning as he did every Saturday, and gave it to Charlotte. "For you and your sisters," he said, "so you can always bake your mother's cake." Stephen watched his daughters clutch the recipe card as if it were a piece of Margaret herself, and in a way it was. He realized then that the ritual of the bakery had never been about the past. It had been about waiting for this moment. The universe had bent toward this reunion, this collision of grief and hope in a small shop on a Saturday morning. But there was still a question that hung in the air, unasked. Patricia was 7 months pregnant, widowed, and planning to leave town. The triplets had just found the only living link to their mother. If Patricia left now, the loss would double. If she stayed, everything would change. Stephen looked at the woman who shared his wife's face, who carried his wife's bloodline, and he made a decision before his brain had finished forming the thought. "You said you were moving away," he said. "Where are you going?" Patricia wiped her eyes. "I don't know yet. I was going to sort through Ruth's house and then figure it out. I don't have family anywhere. It was just Adam and me, and now it's just," she touched her belly, "just us." Stephen took a breath. "You have family here," he said. "You have 3 nieces who already love you. You have a brother-in-law you just met, and I know that's strange, but I have a spare room. It's not much, but it's warm and it's safe. Stay with us, at least until the baby comes." Patricia stared at him. The offer was absurd and generous and terrifying. She barely knew these people, but she looked at the triplets, at their hopeful faces, and she felt something she hadn't felt since Adam died. She felt tethered. She felt seen. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "You're not a burden," Stephen said. "You're family." The word landed like a key turning in a lock. Chloe rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Patricia's legs. "Please stay," she whispered. "Please stay and make Mommy's cake with us." Emma and Charlotte joined the hug, their small bodies pressing against Patricia's belly. The unborn baby kicked as if voting in favor. Patricia looked at Stephen. She looked at Arthur, who nodded, his eyes glistening. She looked at the yellowed envelope in her hand, the letter from a mother she had never met. She thought about the recipe, the lemon cake that had traveled through decades to bring her to this exact moment. She thought about Margaret, the sister she would never know, whose daughters were now asking her to stay. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Outside, the morning sun had climbed fully over the rooftops. The bakery was warm and golden, the pastry case glowing, the chalkboard menu unchanged. The brass bell was silent, but the shop was full of a new kind of sound. The sound of a family stitching itself together from fragments of loss, with nothing but a recipe card and a promise. But even as Patricia made that promise, even as the triplets cheered and Stephen felt a loosening in his chest, there was something none of them knew. There was another secret, one that Arthur had not yet revealed. One that was hidden in the second page of Eleanor's letter, the page addressed only to Patricia. A secret about the man who had fathered both daughters, a man who was still alive, and he lived in this very town. Patricia lifted the second page of Eleanor's letter from the yellowed envelope. Her fingers trembled. The paper was thin, the ink faded to a whisper. She read the first line and her face went hard. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just stopped breathing for a long, terrible moment, then looked up at Arthur with eyes that had turned from shock to steel. "Did you know about this?" she asked. Arthur nodded once. "I knew. I've kept that letter sealed for 40 years. I promised Eleanor I would never open it until one of you came." "Who is he?" Patricia's voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a woman who had already lost her husband and was now discovering that the father who abandoned her mother had been living 7 blocks away while her sister died alone and her nieces grew up without a grandfather. Arthur spoke the name like a confession. His name is Edward Merrick. Stephen felt the ground tilt. Edward Merrick. He was not merely a resident of this town. He was the town. The Merrick family owned the largest real estate development firm in the county. They had built half the subdivisions, the shopping center, the new wing of the hospital. Edward himself served on the city council, chaired the board of the local bank, and was set to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award at the annual summer festival next week. He was a pillar, a benefactor, a man who had his name on a library wing. Stephen had met him once at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital and had shaken his hand. Margaret had taken the triplets to a park that Merrick's foundation had renovated. The bench they sat on every Saturday was engraved with his wife's name. "Wait," Stephen said, the word barely escaping. "Edward Merrick is Aliner's the father." "He was 18 when Aliner got pregnant the first time," Arthur said. "His family had money. His mother was on the hospital board. When they found out about Margaret, they threatened to ruin Aliner, said she was a delinquent, that she'd seduced their son. They paid her $2,000 to disappear. Aliner took the money because she had nothing. She gave Margaret up and promised never to speak Edward's name again." Patricia's hand rested on her belly just below the spot where her baby had kicked moments before. "And then she went back to him. 3 years later. She was 19, Arthur said. He told her he loved her, that he'd leave his parents, that they could run away together and raise the baby this time. She believed him. Until the 7th month when his mother found out and sent him to Europe. He never came back, he never called. Aliner went into labor alone. She died alone. Edward Merrick was on a ski trip in Switzerland when Patricia was born. He never sent a card, he never asked about her." Charlotte, who had been the quietest of the triplets, spoke up. Her small voice carried a clarity that made all the adults turn. "He left our mommy's mommy all by herself." Stephen knelt down. "Yes, baby, he did. That's not fair." Charlotte's lip quivered. "Mommy would have been so sad." Patricia folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "He's still here. He's lived in this town his whole life, building his empire, while my sister, my full sister, grew up 3 streets away not knowing I existed, while she raised these girls, while she died. And he never said a word." "What are you going to do?" Stephen asked. He realized as he said it that he was already aligning with her, already moving from passive witness to active participant. This woman, this stranger who wore his wife's face, was no longer a stranger. She was family. And in this small town, family meant showing up for each other. Patricia looked at the bakery window. The golden light had shifted to a brighter noon glare. Outside, people walked past on Maple Street, ordinary Saturday shoppers who had no idea that a 40-year secret was unraveling inside a pastry shop. "I want to meet him," she said. "I want to look him in the eye and ask him why he left my mother to die." "He won't admit it," Arthur warned. "He spent decades building a reputation. He'll deny everything. He'll call you a liar or worse." "Let him," Patricia said. "I have the letter, I have you, and I have them." She gestured to the triplets who stood clustered like a small protective unit. "He can't deny 3 little girls who look exactly like his dead daughter." Stephen felt a chill. Chloe asked, "Is our grandpa a bad man?" Stephen had no easy answer. The word grandpa was a landmine. He had told the triplets that their grandparents on both sides had passed away. It was simpler that way. Now the truth was surfacing like a body from dark water. "He's a man who made very bad choices," Stephen said. "And now we have to decide what to do about that." The news spread faster than any of them anticipated. By Monday morning, snippets of conversation from the bakery had rippled through the town's gossip network. A woman who looked like Margaret Richardson had shown up, pregnant, asking about some old recipe. By Tuesday, someone had connected the dots. By Wednesday, a reporter from the local weekly paper called Arthur for comment. Arthur hung up, but the damage was done. The story was out. Edward Merrick might have a secret child, maybe 2. And one of them was the late Margaret Richardson, the mother of the identical triplets everyone in town knew. By Thursday, the atmosphere had shifted. Patricia, now staying in Stephen's spare room, noticed the way neighbors stared when she walked to the bakery. The mail carrier lingered a beat too long. A woman at the grocery store pointed. "That's her," she whispered. Patricia kept her head high. She had faced down losing her husband, losing her grandmother, nearly losing her will to get out of bed each morning. The judgment of strangers was a feather compared to that weight, but she could feel the storm gathering. On Friday morning, Stephen received a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was polished and careful. "Mr. Richardson, my name is Lawrence Cobb. I'm an attorney representing the Merrick family. Mr. Merrick would like to meet with you and Ms. Callahan privately before any misunderstandings escalate. He wishes to handle this matter discreetly." Stephen's jaw clenched. What matter is that exactly? The matter of certain false accusations circulating regarding Mr. Merrick's past associations. He has no desire for a public spectacle. He is willing to discuss a private resolution that might benefit all parties, including your daughter's educational futures. Stephen felt anger flare. The man was already offering money, silence money. He thought about Margaret, who had lived her entire life unaware that her biological father was a mile away, a man who could have helped her through medical bills, through sleepless nights, through her own adoption search. He thought about Patricia, who had lost a husband and was now being offered a check to erase her mother's suffering. "We'll meet," Stephen said, "tomorrow, noon, at Golden Rise." Mr. Merrick would prefer a more private location, his home perhaps. "The bakery is where this started, it's where it will end, take it or leave it." A pause. "Very well, noon." Stephen hung up. He looked at Patricia, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway. "He's scared," she said. "Good." The next day, Saturday, dawned bright and warm. Edward Merrick arrived at Golden Rise at exactly noon. He was a tall man in his early 60s, with silver hair and a vested suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He wore an expression of measured concern, the practiced face of a public figure navigating a minor scandal. He was not alone. Lawrence Cobb, a thin-lipped attorney, accompanied him, and so did a younger woman, Edward's daughter from his current marriage, a polished blonde named Victoria who looked like she had stepped out of a country club catalog. The family was presenting a united front. Arthur had closed the bakery for a private event. The sign on the door read, "Closed for family business." He had set up a table in the center, with chairs on either side. Stephen sat with Patricia. Behind them, at a small table by the window, sat the triplets with Angela. Stephen had called his sister-in-law late that night and told her everything. She had driven up from the city to watch the girls during the meeting. The triplets colored quietly, their identical faces a silent testimony. Edward Merrick took his seat. His eyes flicked to Patricia, to her face, to her belly. For a brief instant, something genuine crossed his features, a twitch of recognition, perhaps, or guilt. Then the practiced mask returned. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said. "I'm hopeful we can resolve this misunderstanding amicably." Patricia leaned forward. "I don't misunderstand anything, Mr. Merrick. I have a letter from my birth mother, Eleanor Vance. The letter names you as the father of both her daughters. She wrote it on her deathbed. The baker behind you can confirm every word." Lawrence Cobb opened a leather folio. "Ms. Callahan, I'm sure you believe what you've been told, but Mr. Merrick has no recollection of this woman. Any involvement he may or may not have had as a teenager has been greatly exaggerated. There is no legal basis for any claim you might be considering." "I'm not considering a claim," Patricia said. "I don't want his money, I want him to say her name. I want him to look at those 3 little girls and tell them that their grandmother was a person who mattered, that she wasn't just a mistake he paid to erase." Victoria, the daughter, shifted uncomfortably. She glanced at the triplets. Her face was unreadable. Edward's jaw tightened. "I have a family," he said quietly. "A wife, children, grandchildren on the way. I have built institutions that serve this community. I cannot have my life's work destroyed by a story from decades ago. Surely we can find a compromise." "A compromise," Stephen repeated. The word tasted bitter. "My wife died not knowing she had a sister. My daughters will never meet their grandmother, and you want to negotiate a compromise." Edward's eyes narrowed. "I understand you're grieving, Mr. Richardson, but grief is not a license to rewrite history. There is no proof I fathered anyone. A letter from a dead girl is not proof. An elderly baker's memory is not proof. I have resources, legal and otherwise. If you proceed with this narrative, I will have no choice but to defend myself vigorously." Arthur stepped forward from behind the counter. He had been silent, a quiet witness. Now he placed a small, faded photograph on the table. It was a picture of Alina, 16 years old, standing in front of this very bakery. She was holding a baby Margaret wrapped in a yellow blanket. Beside her stood a teenage boy with a cocky grin and a Merrick family signet ring on his left hand. The boy was unmistakably Edward. "I found this 2 days ago," Arthur said. "Alina hid it in the back of a recipe box. I hadn't looked at it in 30 years. On the back, there's a note. Edward and me with our Margaret. We're going to be a real family someday," he promised. The attorney's eyes widened. Edward's face drained of color. Victoria snatched the photograph and stared at it, her expression cracked. "Dad, that's you with a baby." "This proves nothing," Edward snapped, but his voice had lost its steel. "It's a sentimental relic. Anybody could have written that note." Patricia picked up the letter she had placed on the table. "Then let's read it aloud, shall we? My dearest Patricia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm leaving you this letter so you know the truth about your father. His name is Edward Hale Merrick. He grew up on Elm Street in a house with white columns. He wore a ring with a family crest. He was the first boy I ever loved. He said he loved me back. But when I told him I was pregnant with you, he said his family would never allow him to marry someone like me. Then he left the country. He never said goodbye. I want you to know that your sister Margaret was his child too. She was beautiful and she had his eyes. I hope you find her someday. I hope you both forgive me for not being stronger, and I hope you know that you were wanted. You were wanted by me." Silence filled the bakery. The only sound was the scratch of the triplets' crayons. Chloe had stopped coloring. She was staring at the man who had the same pale blue eyes as her mother, as her aunt, as herself. She didn't fully understand, but she understood enough. She slipped off her chair and walked over to Edward Merrick. She stood before him, a tiny figure in a pale blue dress, her ash blonde hair in pigtails. "Are you why our grandma died?" she asked. Edward could not answer. He looked at the child, at the face that was an echo of Alina, of Margaret, of Patricia. For 40 years, he had buried the past under board meetings and charity galas and carefully curated respectability. Now, a 7-year-old girl was asking him the question that had haunted every quiet moment of his adult life. His attorney started to speak, but Edward raised a hand. "No," he whispered. I didn't know she would die. No one told me. I was a coward. I was 18. His voice broke. "I'm sorry," Victoria recoiled. You knew this whole time that you had other children, that you had a daughter who died." "I found out about Margaret years later. She was already grown, already married. I told myself it was too late to say anything, that she wouldn't want to know me. And then she died, and I thought it was buried forever." Patricia stood. "You thought the truth died with her, but I'm still alive, and those girls are still alive, and their mother's memory is not something you get to sweep under a rug." Edward looked at her, his eyes wet. "What do you want from me?" Patricia glanced at Stephen. He nodded. Then she looked at the triplets. Charlotte gave a small, brave nod too. Patricia turned back to Edward. "I want you to tell this town who you really are. At the summer festival, when you get your Lifetime Achievement Award, you will decline it. You will stand at that podium and tell everyone about Alina Vance, about the girl you abandoned, about the 2 daughters you never claimed, about the granddaughter you could have saved but didn't. If you do that, I will not sue you. I will not go to the press. I'll let you live with whatever remains of your reputation, but you will give Alina back her name." The attorney started objecting. Victoria, her face a storm of betrayal, rose and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold. "Do it, Dad," she said. "For once in your life, do the right thing." Then she left. Edward Merrick sat alone at the table, the photograph and the letter before him. The deal was not justice, not fully. Alina would still be dead. Margaret would still be gone. But the silence of 40 years was about to be broken in the most public way possible. And for the first time, the man who had everything to lose had nothing left to hide. The day of the summer festival arrived. The whole town gathered in the park. A stage was set up, banners fluttering. The Merrick Lifetime Achievement Award was the headline event. Edward took the stage to a round of applause. He looked out over the crowd. In the front row sat Stephen Richardson with his 3 daughters. Beside them sat Patricia Callahan, heavily pregnant in a soft green dress, her hand on her belly. Arthur stood behind them, a quiet sentinel. Edward gripped the podium. His prepared speech lay on the lectern, but he pushed it aside. "I have something to say," he began. "Something you need to know about the man you're honoring tonight." What happened next would change everything, not just for the Merrick family, but for every person in that park who had ever believed that reputation was the same as integrity. The truth was finally stepping into the light, and it was wearing a dead woman's face. Edward looked down at the crowd. The applause had died. The town of Greenfield leaned forward. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was not the polished tone of a councilman. It was raw, like a man confessing to a priest. 42 years ago," he said, "I met a girl named Eleanor Vance. She was 15 years old. She was beautiful and kind, and she had no one. I told her I loved her. I told her I would take care of her. And when she got pregnant, I let my parents pay her off like a debt, and I never looked back." Gasps rippled through the audience. The mayor's wife dropped her program. A reporter near the stage fumbled for her phone. 3 years later," Edward continued, "I found her again. I said I'd changed. She believed me. She got pregnant a second time, and when my mother found out, she sent me to Europe. I went. I left Eleanor with nothing, and she died giving birth to my daughter. That daughter is sitting here today." He gestured toward Patricia, who sat pale and still. "Her name is Patricia Callahan. Her husband was recently killed. She is carrying their child, and standing next to her are my granddaughters, the triplet daughters of Margaret Richardson. Margaret was my firstborn. I never met her. She died 3 years ago without ever knowing I existed." The crowd erupted. Some people stood shouting. Others sat frozen. A man from the Rotary Club yelled, "This is a disgrace." Victoria, standing at the side of the stage, was weeping openly. Lawrence Cobb motioned to pull Edward away, but Edward shook him off. "I am declining this award," he said. "I am not the man you thought I was. I am not the man I thought I was. I'm a coward and a liar. I have spent 40 years building a prison out of silence. Now I am tearing it down." He stepped away from the microphone. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Then, from the front row, Chloe clapped. It was a small, fragile sound. Then Emma joined her. Then Charlotte. Then Stephen. Then Patricia, slow and deliberate. Then Arthur, his weathered hands coming together with a sound like old parchment folding. Not the whole town joined, but enough did. Enough to prove that truth had a power that reputation never would. The next weeks were chaos. The local paper ran the story on the front page for 10 days straight. Edward resigned from the city council and the bank board. His lifetime achievement plaque was removed from the library. He lost business partners, friends, invitations, but Patricia did not press charges. She had what she wanted, Eleanor's name spoken aloud. One evening, a week after the festival, Edward knocked on Stephen's door. He looked smaller, diminished. He asked to see the triplets. Stephen nearly closed the door, but Patricia intervened. She allowed him 10 minutes. He told the girls about their grandmother, about her laugh, about her love of baking. He told them he was sorry. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The girls listened, then went back to their coloring. They were gracious, but they were not his. He would have to earn any future visits, and he knew it. Patricia gave birth on a Tuesday in October. Stephen drove her to the hospital at 2 in the morning. She named the baby Eleanor Ruth Callahan, after the mother who died to give her life and the grandmother who raised her. The triplets crowded around the hospital bed, their identical faces beaming. Chloe held the baby like she was made of spun sugar. "She looks like Mommy," she whispered. Stephen looked at the newborn's pale blue eyes, already open and curious, and felt tears come. Patricia looked up at him. "She does," she said. "Margaret is in every one of these girls." The room was full of a family that had been forged through loss. By Christmas, the spare room had become a permanent nursery. Patricia had sold Ruth's house and used the money to pay off her debts and set up a college fund for the baby. She found a job at a nearby law firm, using the skills she'd built before Adam died. Stephen converted the garage into a bakery for the girls. They called it Eleanor's Kitchen, and every Saturday they opened to the public with lemon cake and croissants. Arthur, now retired, would sit at the corner table and smile. On Christmas morning, the triplets woke at dawn. They ran to the tree and then to the kitchen where Patricia had set out bowls and whisks. She took out the yellowed index card, now laminated for safekeeping. "We're going to bake your mom's cake," she said. And they did. They creamed the butter and sugar, they zested the lemons, they sifted the flour, the kitchen filled with the scent that had drawn them all together. Meanwhile, Stephen took the envelope from the safe. He had not opened the page meant for Margaret. Now he called the girls over. "This is from your grandmother, Alina, to your mommy," he read aloud. "My sweet Margaret, I have loved you every day since I first felt you move inside me. I named you after a flower because I wanted you to grow wild and free. I am so sorry I couldn't keep you. I hope you find a family who laughs as much as I dreamed you would. And if you ever taste a lemon cake that reminds you of something you can't name, that's me. That's the love I baked into every crumb. Come find me one day. I'll be waiting in the kitchen." The girls cried. Stephen cried. Patricia, holding baby Alina, cried. Then Charlotte, always the quiet one, spoke. "She's not waiting anymore. She's with Mommy now." And somehow that made them all smile. That afternoon, the family gathered at the dining table. Stephen, Patricia, the triplets, baby Alina, Arthur. The lemon cake sat in the center, golden and perfect. They each took a bite. It tasted exactly as it always had, sweet and tart and tender. And for the first time, Stephen thought not of what was lost, but of what had been found. A sister, an aunt, a niece, a recipe that had traveled through decades like a life raft. A mother's love baked into a dessert, finally reaching the mouths of her grandchildren. Some stories end with a door closing. This one ended with an oven door opening. The bell above the bakery still chimes every Saturday morning. And the recipe that seemed so simple, flour, sugar, lemons, tears, turned out to be the most complex inheritance anyone could ask for, because it carried a dead girl's promise, a dead mother's legacy, and a living family's future. It just needed someone to walk through the door and ask for it. The lemon cake isn't magic. It's just flour and sugar and zest, the kind of recipe you could find in any old cookbook. But put it in the hands of a girl who had nothing, who loved her daughters so completely she turned her grief into an ingredient, and suddenly it isn't just a cake anymore. It's a thread connecting a bakery, a mother's deathbed, a widower's Saturday ritual, a pregnant stranger's pilgrimage. It's proof that the smallest acts, baking a dessert, writing a letter, keeping a promise, can outlive the people who made them. Stephen still wakes early on Saturdays. The triplets still wear matching dresses, though Emma recently argued for mismatched socks and won. Chloe still sleeps with her mother's sweater, though now she also has a photograph of Patricia holding baby Alina, both of them laughing. Charlotte has started writing her own recipes, little notes on index cards in looping pencil script, as if she already understands that some legacies are edible. Arthur still visits every Saturday. He doesn't bake anymore. His hands are too shaky. But he sits at the corner table and watches the girls work, and sometimes his eyes get wet without him noticing. Patricia never expected to find family in this town. She came for a recipe and discovered an inheritance far heavier than index cards. She found a sister she'll never meet, nieces who needed her, a brother-in-law who opened his door without hesitation. She found her mother's voice, preserved for decades in a sealed envelope. And in that voice, she found the answer to the question every adopted child asks, was I wanted? Alina's letter proved she was. The lemon cake baked by her own hands makes that truth tangible. Edward Merrick still lives in Greenfield, but he's a ghost of his former prominence. He visits occasionally, always unannounced, always hesitant. The triplets tolerate him, which is more than he deserves. Victoria has started a private foundation for young single mothers, funded by Merrick money redirected from vanity projects. She and Patricia speak sometimes, not as family, but as women who learned the same hard lesson about the men who shaped their lives. Arthur passed the bakery keys to Stephen last spring. The sign out front still says Golden Rise, but underneath, smaller, it now reads Alina's Kitchen. The triplets insisted. They bake the lemon cake every Saturday and people come from all over the county. Some know the story, others just know it's the best lemon cake they've ever tasted. Both are true. The recipe card, now framed, hangs above the pastry case. It's stained with decades of butter and vanilla, the ink fatting but still legible. Next to it hangs a photograph, Alina at 16, holding baby Margaret, standing in front of this very bakery. And next to that, a newer photo, Patricia, Stephen, the triplets, and baby Alina all smeared with flour laughing. The circle is not closed because grief doesn't close. It changes shape. It becomes something you can pass down, something that feeds instead of starves. There are thousands of small-town bakeries in the world. Thousands of secret recipes, handwritten letters, sealed adoption records. This story is not unique. Somewhere right now, a stranger is walking into a cafe, asking a question they don't understand the weight of. Somewhere, a baker is waiting with an answer. The question is never just about cake. It's about where we belong, who knew us before we knew ourselves, and what we're willing to bake with the ingredients we're given. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about the recipes in your own family, the letters never opened, the questions never asked, maybe it's time to ask them. And if you want more stories like this, ones that start with something small and turn into something unforgettable, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, and don't let the next one pass you by. The story you need might be waiting behind the very next door. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.